What's been happening in Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. And this is a difficult topic to broach, but I want to make the case for you because it's something that I care a great deal about. And not just because I'm Jewish, and therefore I care about the Holocaust or something. And not just because I am a historian of ideas and have extensively studied genocide. So genocide studies is an interest of mine. I literally teach this. I've taught comparative genocide and teach a course on political violence in the 20th century that extensively covers this. It's something about which I've always been involved. And it's frustrating that it's so difficult to get people to recognize that that's what this is. I just ran into somebody on Twitter again today. This guy is himself a scholar and was saying, oh, all these people saying that it's genocide or whatever, they should just look up the definition. I'm like, really? Let's start with that definition because that kind of dishonesty really bothers me. So I'm going to lay this out for you, and I'm going to give you ways to understand why it fits that definition. I'll try to do this as quickly as I can. There are two basic things that you need in order to discuss something as a genocide. The first is a question of intent, and the second is the acts. And technically, just the attempt at the acts is prosecutable, but that's a separate issue. But I need to deal with both intentions and acts. Now, first off, as far as what acts count, it's not just building a death camp or something and killing tons of people there. There are 5 things, any one of which fits the definition of genocide. Any one of these 5. And what I'm going to show you, or try to show you here, is that 3 of these are quite active in the case of what's happening in Palestine today. First, killing members of the group. Now, when you're talking about a group, you mean killing them as a group. That applies to all of these. So not just as individuals, but as members of a group for that identity. So as Palestinians, they are a problem. So killing members of the group counts, but so too does causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Serious bodily or mental harm to the groups counts as genocide. Think about that. Because again, it's about targeting people as a group. The third is inflicting conditions of life intended to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. That also is going to be very important here. The other 2 don't apply as much. They're measures to prevent births, although that is kind of an incidental effect here. That also kind of applies. And then forcibly transferring children out of the group. So things like residential schools or whatever. But let's set that aside. At least 3 and possibly 4 of these things are clear. Now, intent matters. So let's deal with the question of intent. You can see this demonstrated not just in a century and a half of Zionist literature and the way that it discusses its national conflict and the kinds of actions and statements made throughout the history of this conflict. There's a ton of things involved in Israel's settler colonial past and its apartheid legal system that make clear that there is an intent to harm this group. But let's think specifically about what's been happening since the horrific attacks of 7th October. And again, nothing I'm saying here takes away from the fact that Hamas and its 4 allies in that attack did commit a war crime, and they did engage in a horrific massacre of people. But when you see tons of people in Israel and people in media and in political positions comparing Hamas to Nazis, it's just a bizarre inversion because the Nazis were clearly the power and the Jews were the weaker side in this struggle. It's a bizarre inversion of things. Now, setting aside that question of comparison to Nazis, itself a problem, there's also the matter of dehumanizing rhetoric, calling them animals, which has happened rather a lot. Then you have things like President Herzog saying that all of the people of Gaza are responsible. Now, bear in mind, half the population are literal children because the birth rate is quite high. They don't have a whole lot else to do. So yeah, they're all responsible. And people making claim, well, people voted for Hamas. Okay, yeah, a small share of the overall total. It comes up to something like, I don't know, 12% or something of the population of adults back in 2006 or something. It's nonsense. But saying they're all responsible and can all be targeted. Prime Minister Netanyahu's promised to turn Gaza into rubble, which has been borne out. The north has been flattened. If you want to think about the ordnance dropped there, we know at least about 40,000 tons of ordnance have been dropped in there, which is equivalent to 2 Hiroshima bombs have been dropped on Gaza so far. And then you have his at least twice references to Amalek, a biblical story where God gives an injunction to commit genocide, to kill everyone, children included. When you have the prime minister, the leader of a government, making direct references like this to the people in the military with the ability to do so, there is a clear intent stated. Then you have sitting cabinet ministers like Eliyahu saying that, nuking Gaza is an option. He has not been kicked out of the cabinet. Then you have the intelligence ministry's plan to push the people of Gaza into the Sinai Desert. Think about how that's been used only in the 20th century. In the Herero genocide in Namibia, the Germans pushed significant chunks of people into the desert to die. In the Ottoman genocides against the Armenians, significant chunks of the population were pushed into the Syrian desert to die. Pushing people into the Sinai is a death sentence, and people know that. Now, thinking again about the totals dead and the kinds of destruction that you're looking at, if you add it up here, especially since the numbers, and people keep downplaying the Hamas Ministry of Health, like whatever numbers, it's insane. Like the WHO takes them seriously, the UN takes them seriously, Médecins Sans Frontières takes them seriously. We know how they do it, and they're undercounting the dead. We're looking at somewhere around 1% of the population already are dead, and that's before the outbreaks of disease and starvation that are likely to follow, the collective punishment tactics that have been in play since the attack. You have people reduced to an amount of water way, way below international standards required to sustain life. Food is running out. Medicines are running out, which means given the massive overcrowding with the entire population squeezed into the southern half of the Strip, you're going to have outbreaks of disease, and you're going to lack the ability to take care of those outbreaks of disease. You're going to have people suffering and dying because they're malnourished. They're not getting enough water or food to prevent outbreaks of disease or other things from claiming them. Tons of people are going to succumb to injuries over time because there's no real ability to treat them. And people keep getting bombed throughout the process of this. It's just, I don't even know how to deal with this at this point. The death tolls are going to be much, much higher than they already are. And they're already horrific. The number of civilians killed here is already higher than in the Ukraine conflict, which is near 2 years old now? And the numbers of women and children killed in it are vastly higher than we have reports out of Ukraine in a couple of years. This is in less than 2 months that you've seen this. And it's also, when we look and say it is indisputable that things like the Srebrenica massacre, things that happened in the Yugoslav wars as the state was tearing itself apart are genocide, when the death tolls are much lower and the statements of intent are even less clear. How is it that that's an unambiguous case for people, and yet all these Western powers are perfectly happy to support what the Israelis are doing here and not to call this genocide? In fact, frequently people in our government here are chiming in and calling all of the Palestinians Nazis. It is insane to me that we do not recognize this as a textbook case of genocide, and it needs to be, because never again means never again to anyone, not just never again to Jews. Think about it.